Lydia and you, Jose, who is actually the foremost grand dam of Japanese studies in the Philippines. I was able to publish an article on Filipina entertainers in Japan in this volume, Japan, Migration, and a Multicultural Society. So when I talk about multiculturalism, my context is always Japan because of my background. And then recently, I also published on disaster philanthropy in this monograph. This is actually available. If you just Google it, you can download it for free from Sophia University website. Okay. Let's begin with what I observed about the current state of migration theorizing. So during the early stage of migration theorizing, I noticed that most theories are developed in the field of demography. And when you talk about demographic theories of migration, this is referring to Ravenstein's laws on migration, the gravity model, Stauffer's theory of mobility, and Everett Lee's theory of migration, which are usually determined by economic motives. No, that's why there is a desire for mobility. For example, Ravenstein would say it is always a universal law that humans would want to migrate in order to improve their human lot. There's always a desire to look for greener pastures and to improve one's economic situation. So my desire is not to explicate on each theory because the goal of this talk is not to produce depth, but to orient you, to give you a bird's eye view of migration studies as a field, no? And also to deliver breadth rather than depth. So I'm not going into the nitty-gritty of each theory because that would take up so much of our time, and there is an entire lecture just for this. Also, from demography, let's go now to the classical theories on migration. Right now, the leading contemporary theories on international migration are still diverse, and there is no single coherent theory that would weave everything. But just to make sense of it, let us just subdivide it into two groups. No, there are theories that are considered to be part of those explaining the initiation to international migration. Why do individuals migrate? No, they try to explain that. And then another group of theories would explain why transnational population flows persist across space and time. In short, why do migrants continually migrate, including their families, left behind family members, even neighbors or other members of their community, producing second or even third generations of immigrants. So just to give you the names of these theories, under the initiation of international migration, you have neoclassical economics, which basically they use wage differentials in order to explain why individuals are attracted to leave their countries and migrate to another country. And you have new economics of migration, which says that you have to look at the household, no, as a unit of analysis rather than the individual. Because in the case of developing countries like the Philippines, migrant decision making is not an individual decision. It's always a household decision or a family decision. So we also have the dual labor market theory, which explains it using push and pull factors between the countries of origin and the countries of destination, and explaining it as a creation of demand, no, from the rich and advanced countries. And then lastly, you have the world systems theory, which has a Marxist framing. And then they try to explain it in terms of dependency relations between the core countries and the peripheral countries, and even go between countries. No? For example, we have a core country, the United States, and then we have the developing country as the periphery, like the Philippines. We supply nurses, diba, to the United States. And the go-between there would be countries like Japan and then Singapore, or could be the Middle East as well, which is usually parang stepping stone yan ng mga Filipino nurses before they eventually migrate to English-speaking countries of the destination. So another set of theories can be focused naman on explaining why is migration perpetuated? Why are we creating next generations of immigrants? Di pa ba sapat ang isang generation lang? Mula kay lolo papunta sa mga sa mga anak na sa mga kaapu-apuhan, they have become a cycle of migration, so to speak. So meron tayong network theory to explain that. For example, these immigrants would attract, for example, mga kababayan nila in the same town, mga kapitbahay nila, creating a transnational social network, enabling further migration. Diba? Kasi andyan na yung network eh. Andyan yung ideas, yung resources, yung support networks. Institutional theory naman, it would explain migration in terms of the role of mediating agencies, no? For example, the role of government organizations that facilitate that. For example, the POAA in the Philippines is known to be the most sophisticated government agency in the world that sends migrants to other countries. It is even observed by, let's say, the Indian government so that they can pattern the way the Philippine government manages migration to their own Indian diaspora. And also the role of labor deployment or recruitment agencies in facilitating migration. No? Yan yung institutional theory. Also, meron tayong cumulative causation theory and migration systems theory. And they all have reasons to answer why migrants continually migrate, or why they continue to stay in the migration cycle. Okay, so let's move forward, no? So right now, if you look at the literature on migration, you can see that there are several research problems that are emerging. So currently, what I observe is that these are the key theoretical problematics arising from migration theorizing. First is, ang pinaka-original dyan would be the nexus between migration and development. And this has been tackled by Stephen Castles, prominent scholar on migration as early as 2009. And of course, our very own leading migration scholar, Dr. Maruja Asis of the Scalabrini Migration Center, and attorney Gold Roma of the ILO Philippines, no? In 2010, how migration is actually linked to national development. And these nexus would eventually bridge the gap between migration studies and mainstream social theory or sociological theory in particular. Also, there's another problematic in migration, which tries to look at the subjectivity of migrants and empowerment as well. So we all know that in the field of sociology, there's this broader agency structure debate, hindi ba? But this effort by Oliver Bakewell in 2010 aims to apply the agency structure debate in sociology in migration theory, in migration theorizing, in order to explain how migrants become subjects and how are they empowered at the same time. So Michel Foucault would tell us that every human experience is always complex, that you can become a subject and at the same time empowered all at the same time. For example, an abused domestic worker in Hong Kong, abused by her employers, can at the same time experience empowerment by being able to shape the minds of the children of her abusive employers, no? As they are left at home. So it's an experience of being abused and being empowered at the same time. It's always a complex experience. So similar works that are related to this, for example, engaging the agency structure debate in migration. You have the classic work of Rachel Perinas, Servants of Globalization, if you want to look at the experience of Filipino maids in two locations, no? In California and then in Italy. So she compared used two locations in her field work. So she looked at the four macro processes that are acting on the experiences of these Filipino maids producing these locations, no? And how they experience subject formation. She also uses the concept of partial citizenship in order to highlight the limits of practicing citizenship in those countries, the United States and Italy. Also, another take on this debate would be internal versus external subjectivity. These are concepts proposed by Nana Uishi in her book Women in Motion. All right, another problematic that I saw would be gender and migration. So in the Philippines, for example, you have Ma'am Marla Asis, and she co-wrote this paper with Professor Huang and Dr. Brenda Yo of National University of Singapore in 2004, where they looked at how migration flows have become feminized through time. And then also the fourth theoretical problematic that I have identified from the literature is the connection between migration and transnationalism. And because we all know that when you talk about crossing borders, that's an example of that would be migration. Although migration is not the only example of transnationalism. Okay, so if you want to understand how they are theoretically linked together, you can look at the paper of Yo and Ramdas published in 2014. So from theorizing, we go to empirical research on migration. So in broad strokes, I want to tell you what I observe from doing a review of literature in the field. What are the current trends of empirical research on migration? The first thing that I noticed is that there's burgeoning research right now on emerging entrepreneurship among Filipino migrants. For example, in Paris, there is this research from Fresnoza Flot and Picot about Filipino immigrant business activities in Paris, published in 2007. And also there's this study on Netherlands-based Filipino migrants by Marisha Mas in 2011. And there's also a study on ethnic businesses in Tokyo by Dr. Johanna Zueta among Filipino migrants naman in Japan. So nakakatuwa hindi ba na there's increasing business activities among Filipinos in the diaspora. And also another trend pero hindi pa masyadong pinag-aaralan would be the businesses and investments of return migrants in the Philippines, no? Once they return in the Philippines, they carry with them financial capital, human capital, and social networks, and they all use this to establish businesses in the Philippines as they try to replant their roots back in home. Okay. Also, another important phenomenon right now in migration studies is brain circulation. You know, in the Philippines, wala pa masyadong gumagawa nito. So hopefully, as we breed future migration scholars, pwede sanang our efforts could also be directed in studying brain circulation. Because this is actually a debate with the brain drain perspective, wherein we look at the outflow of high-skilled Filipino professionals negatively as brain drain. But there is this another perspective, the brain circulation perspective, which states that not all outflows are losses, no? For example, these high-skilled immigrants are usually the ones who return, bringing with them different types of capital. They're the ones who set up businesses. And then there's also a tendency to be a tentative return, for tentative return. Balikbayan phenomenon, no? Na uuwi sa Pilipinas pero babalik din. Maraming nagsiset up ng foundations ng mga professionals, for example, sa States, no? Yung mga returning scientists and engineers, magsiset up ng foundation, businesses, NGO in the Philippines, and yet they still return, let's say, in California, in the Silicon Valley, no? And then babalik ulit. So pabalik-balik. We call this brain circulation, di ba? So it's not really a drain, but a circulation. This is one way of holistically and even positively looking at high-skilled professional Filipino migration. If we want a pattern for this, maybe you can visit the work of Yuriko Sato, published just last year, 2021, no? Among international students who are in Japan. Also, Chen et al. In 2021. So, relatively, kung nakikita niyo yung mga nire-recommend kong mga studies, 2021 na kasi bago talaga yung brain circulation na area, no, na trend, emerging trend sa empirical research. Wala pa nga ako nakikitang may gumagawa nito sa ating mga Pilipino. Kaya dapat siguro bilisan na natin, ano. We have to do work on this frontier. Also, we have multiple migration at parang brain circulation din. Wala pa masyadong gumagawa sa among Filipino migrants. Pero alam ko, based on experience and exposure to data, na tayong mga Pilipino are very much into multiple migration. Example lang yung mga nurses natin. They would migrate first in the Middle East, and then after 2 years, they gain credentials, and they move to English-speaking countries, no? Or other countries where they feel there's better benefits for them. So right now, ito yung mga publications on multiple migrations. Monska, 2017, Caron, 2020, Jolivet, and Zafari et al. You can visit that, no, to look at how their research design, no, and be inspired on how they attack their research and how we can do that as well for Filipino, our very own Filipino migrants. And of course, return migration. Sa tatlong phase ng migration, ang pre-deployment, deployment, at saka return, yan yung pinaka-under-research. Yan ang sinasabi ni Professor Stella Go, who published her monograph in 2012 on return migration in the Philippines, no? So kailangan masundan pa yung pag-aaral ni ma'am because, as I said, even to this very day, we have very little documentation and understanding and state support on managing our return migrants. Unlike, for example, sa China, where a government agency is taking care of that. India is doing the same. What about the Philippines, no? And then remittances, no? We still lack researches on this. We can pattern, for example, itong research ng naging senpai ko siya sa Japan. We shared the same professor. Si Hassan Mahmood, who is doing remittance research among Bangladeshi migrants around the world. And then diaspora giving, I've started work on this, mga diaspora philanthropy. I published one in 2013, but originally, I think the most prolific Filipino researchers studying diaspora giving among Filipino migrants would be Professor Jeremiah Opignano, who published works on this in 2005. Okay, so from current trends, it's so easy to get lost in the mountain of literature on migration. So I'm going to share this afternoon how I make sense of it as a researcher. No? To find my way across this too many information on migration, I usually look at it in terms of 3 categories or 3 approaches to look for literature by topic area. or by migrant identity and issue, and by country of destination. This is how I do it in a course on migration and transnationalism I teach for LaSalle, no? Both at the graduate and undergraduate level. Usually I do it by topic area and then by migrant identity and issue. And because of my background in Japanese studies, I focus usually on Japan. Although I still cover other destination countries, but admittedly, that's not my expertise. So by topic area, for example, the topic areas that I list down here together with the research, the citation, in-text citations, usually these are the topic areas that I usually see, no, sa mga migration researches. Pre-departure, it's actually under research. The only person I know doing research on this, I talked to her on the phone, si Professor Victoria Licuanan of the AIM, who started a research back in 2014 until 2016 on PIDOS, the Pre-Departure Orientation Seminar of the POTA. And then ang Culture of Migration, no, by Dr. Marla Asis, Return Migration by Professor Stella Go, Brain Circulation, you see these are foreign researchers, Multiple Migration, Remittances, Migrant Giving or Philanthropy. And there's also burgeoning research on the migrant religiosity, spirituality of Filipino migrants in particular by Dr. Babos Asor, Dr. Josefina Tondo, Father Baggio, and Dr. Agnes Brazal. Also, when you talk about feminization of migration, that's still an ongoing topic, no? And there have been many researches on this, but I think it needs updating. Also, another favorite topic area in migration would be the well-being of left behind children and family members. Maraming research na nagawa on this. Kulang pa nga yung na-cite ko dito ng mga researches na pwede nyo i-consult when it comes to research on left behind children and family members. Also, as I said, my second approach usually in looking at the literature on migration would be to look at it by migrant identity and issue. So by migrant identity, in the course I'm teaching on migration, I usually identify the following occupational identities: the maids and domestic helpers, nannies, and the au pairs in Europe. Usually yung mga au pairs sa Denmark at saka sa Netherlands, no? At sa Norway. So wala pa masyadong research on au pair, but may nakita ako online na research presentation by Bongko Din Isip just last year. No? Hopefully makakuha tayo ng copy nito pag na-publish na. And of course, the classic study on Filipino maids by Rachel Parinas in 2001, Servants of Globalization. I think it's one of the classics in migration that any aspiring migration researcher should read. Also, study on Filipino nurses and caregivers. We have MUIR in 2020. That's the most updated that I saw. So meron ng factor ng effects ng COVID pandemic sa kanilang occupation. And of course, the classic study on this, you have Servants of Globalization for maids. For Filipino nurses naman, we have a book titled Empire of Care, written by Catherine Seniza Choi, published in 2003. This is a classic work on classic research on Filipino nurses. No? Please do read that. And of course, when you talk about marriage migrants and mail order brides, not exclusive lang sa mga Filipino migrants, but Chinese as well, we have Nicole Constable, no, who talked about Chinese and Japanese mail order brides and marriage migrants, no, as they married Western men. And also, if you want to look at Filipinas who are marriage migrants in Japan, you can take a look at the many publications of Liba Fayer on this. No? Meron siyang article on runaway brides, Filipino runaway brides in Japan. Ito yung mga Filipina na tinatakasan yung mga asawa nilang Hapon and then they divorce, but they stay in Japan and transition later on to working visas. No? And you also have work on entertainers and sex workers. These are two different things, no? Kasi entertainers could refer to dancers lang or singers. In Japan, for example, even yung mga DJs at actresses and concert, yung mga nagko-concert o yung mga pop idol, they are considered as entertainers. But sex workers are also a part of that, no? The term entertainer, as they come on entertainer visa. So you can take a look at these researches if you want to know more about the entertainers and sex workers. Also, migrant entrepreneurs, no? MAS, Fresnosa, Flot, and Pico. And then seafarers, we have very recent researches on this, si Dr. Mark Oliver Lianco and Dr. Sandy Abel, no? And they look at the well-being, the situation, and the mental health with effects. Meron din mga recent articles ng effects ng COVID pandemic sa ating mga Filipino seafarers. I'm sure marami pang iba pang migrant identities, no? Like yung mga Filipino software programmers natin, ang mga Filipino construction workers, ang mga high skill at low skill na mga workers natin. Napakarami pang migrant specific migrant identities and company issues na pwede nating isama dito sa list. But these are the basic and ito yung mga may published works na so far. And the third way of looking at this body of literature on migration would be by country of destination. What I noticed so far, the frequently researched areas would be, of course, North America, particularly the United States, Western Europe, Oceania, which of course include New Zealand and Australia, and some Pacific countries, richer nations of Asia like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, and the Middle East. Pero we cannot deny that the Filipino diaspora is really very broad and it has reached so many locations na in the world, and that includes Africa. There are so many Filipinos now in Africa, India, and even Eastern Europe, some parts of the Middle East and Latin America, but there's so little we know about their lives there kasi wala masyadong research na nagagawa on that. For example, may mga Filipinos in Israel, no? Pero wala masyadong nasusulat about them. All right. Also, another approach, no, that we can possibly benefit from is to mine and distill migration-related research from a separate field, but connected to migration studies. Japanese studies, for example, Oceania studies and American studies can offer some leads, no, in order to get into reports and researches on Filipino migrants in those locations. For example, ako, pag nagja-Japanese studies research ako, of course, malaki yan, pero meron dyan makukuha ka na involving migrants, particularly the lives of Filipino migrants in Japan. Because my interest in Japanese studies usually begins from the fact that I'm a Filipino and I'm interested to learn about the lives of Filipino migrants in Japan. But traditional Japanese studies is of course purely about Japan, Japanese history, Japanese society, and Japanese popular culture. But since they have already increasingly become multicultural, Japanese studies accommodates migration now, no? Because of the multicultural nature, increasingly Japan has increasingly become an immigrant nation. Okay. At this point, let me clarify the linkage between migration and multiculturalism. Because they're linked, but they're still separate with one another. Immigration is the one that creates multiculturalism naturally, no? Also, we have to clarify that multiculturalism is actually a consequence, one of the many consequences of immigration. So right now, in broad strokes, let's talk about the state of theorizing multiculturalism. No? So there are two theories which are psychological in terms of approach, no, in looking at multiculturalism. First is the melting pot theory. The theory behind this is that various immigrant groups are believed that they can melt together as time goes by, and they would slowly abandon their individual cultures, and they would become fully assimilated into the destination country. This theory is criticized for being reductionist towards the existence of cultural diversity. Kasi naniniwala siya na magiging homogeneous eventually yung destination country by assimilating the foreigners, no? So another theory would be the salad bowl theory. Just like the salad bowl, di ba? As the different fruits in the salad will not change its composition, but they can mix together and go well. So it is believed that these unique ethnic communities can retain their traditional culture, their own language, their own tradition, and that's not even a problem because they can still coexist with one another in one society. However, there's also a criticism on this, no? They're criticized for producing societal division, leading to prejudice and discrimination. Okay. So because of these two general approaches, this eventually led to various theories on how to create policies for migration, no, for migrants. So we have two theories so far on multiculturalism. We have the theories on the modes of incorporation by the sociologist Jeffrey Alexander, who saw that these modes of incorporation are modes of civil participation as well. No? So he looks at it that there is assimilation theory, hyphenation, and multiculturalism. Also, while medyo political yung focus ni Professor Alexander, meron namang cultural integration theories in the social sciences, and they have three theories on multiculturalism: assimilation theory, multiculturalism, and structuralism. As I said, I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty because that deserves another full-blown lecture. My goal is to really outline in broad strokes what resources do we have, no? What is the current state of theorizing and research in migration and in multiculturalism as well. So right now, what I observe these are what I observe as the current trends of empirical researches on multiculturalism. So una dyan yung work ni Saskia Sassen in 2001 on global cities, no? And also we have here studies on ethnic enclaves, no? For example, yung work ni Espinoza, Kulik et al. Published in 2021. Ethnic enclaves would refer to a specific nation, multicultural, wherein in their key cities, there are ethnic enclaves, no? Or there are specific locations where certain ethnic migrant groups agglomerate. For example, in Tokyo, meron tayong lugar na Petit Paris. It's in a particular location in Tokyo where there is a French academy and a host of other businesses in that area, and it's beginning to look like Paris, no? In Shin-Okubo is also known to be another ethnic town, no, in Japan, where Southeast Asians have businesses. There's also considered Little Myanmar in Waseda area, in Takadanobaba Station area, because of the presence of restaurants there, no, from Myanmar. Also, ang alam ko, ang mga Filipinos are usually in Saitama, no? So may kanya-kanya mga location. Ang mga Chinese, ganun din, no? So may mga little, ang Chinatown sa Japan is nasa Yokohama, no? If you visited if you wanna look for the Chinatown in Japan, go to Yokohama, the city of Yokohama. Okay. Yes, no? At saka, of course, marami pang ibang mga ethnic groups. There's also a Koreatown, no, in Japan. Ito yung mga ethnic enclaves. We even here in Manila, hindi ba may mga ethnic enclaves tayo? For example, Binondo is an ethnic enclave. It's our Chinatown. Nung panahon ng nung Spanish colonial period, the Paco area is considered to be Dilao town, no? Kasi andyan yung mga Japanese migrants, no? Which is of course contrasted with Binondo naman, the Parian district. So ethnic enclaves research is one, and then also immigrant businesses. You can take a look at the works of Professor Gracia Limpar on overseas Chinese businesses in Japan, for example. This one good example of that. Also, there's a lot of work right now on bicultural children, no? Transnational parenting, no? They're linked together. Intercultural marriages, very exciting yan. I think multi-sited na ang mga research on intercultural marriages. Korea-Filipino marriages, Japanese-Filipino, Filipino-American. These are all parang burgeoning areas. Also, another trend would be citizenship and claims making. This was started by Yasmin Soysal in 1997. But I think we Filipinos could also benefit from using this approach, claims making. Yes, Yasmin Soysal looked at the claims making of Muslim immigrants in Europe, no? And considering that we Filipinos also experience migration, just like them, no? As partial citizens, no? We can benefit from using this concept from this lens of analysis in looking at the Filipino migrant experience, no, as a partial citizen abroad. Okay. And then, for example, I'll just belabor on one of these trends, yung kay Professor Saskia Sassen. In her work right now on her specific work on global cities, she examines the role of these global cities. Meron pa lang, by the way, Global City Index. You can Google for it. May mga ranking yan, no, where cities are ranked according to certain parameters for global cityhood. She looks at cities as major nodes of information and capital. Key to her concept is that a global city tends to hoard the flow of information and capital. And then these cities are serving as the major nodes of the capitalist system, global capitalist system, which are interconnected systems of information, money, and wealth, and how it is connected to flows, no, from businesses, facilitated by financial institutions, consulting firms, accounting firms, law firms, and media organizations. So Sassen states in her work that flows, whether financial or intellectual or cultural, are no longer shut in tight containers, no, within the nation state. They're no longer tightly bound to national boundaries and systems of regulation, because there's now transnational and global flow of money, commodities, information, even human bodies. So the dynamics of the global city is now different from the dynamics of these global cities during the 19th century. So as migration researchers or aspiring migration students, what are the future prospects for us, no, in the years to come? Interestingly, of course, there's this burgeoning study during this pandemic about the effects of the COVID pandemic to our migrants. Iba-iba kasi yung effects sa seafarers, sa mga healthcare workers and nurses natin. Iba-iba yung effects sa international students kasi maraming international students, they were stuck in their home countries, hindi sila nakalipad. Meron namang stuck sa mga countries where they are studying nung biglang nagkaroon ng lockdowns around the world, hindi ba? Aside from that, yung sa COVID-related na research on migrants, pwede nating tingnan yung return migration at brain circulation na talaga namang under-researched pa o wala pa at all pag-aaral sa Filipinos. Pero nangyayari na, di ba? Hindi nakakapag-cope ang ating empirical outputs doon sa phenomenon itself, which is already happening, di ba? Siguro kulang sa funding or focus na lang din. Pangalawa, we can also be inspired by what Dr. Michael Baravoy, an American sociologist, has pioneered yung practice ng multi-sited ethnography. He studied industrial workplaces across the globe, no? Hungary, New York, and some parts of Russia. Tapos kinumpare niya yung situation ng mga workers, no, sa mga industrial workplaces na ito around the world. And he was the one who said that right now, when you do ethnography, you have to do multi-sited ethnography or global ethnography because doing comparative research is still theoretically limited. So we can apply that kind of suggestion to migration research. And the closest study that I can think of would be Professor Rachel Parinia's Servants of Globalization. This is the closest to having a global ethnography in our field, no, migration. Pero ang masasabi ko, hindi pa rin multi-sited yung kay Dr. Parinias kasi dalawa lang yung niya yung field site niya. Los Angeles and then Italy. So dapat kailangan pa ng isa o dalawa pang location before she can deliver to the multi-sited ethnography being recommended by Michael Baravoy. So that's it so far, no? So thank you so much for listening. I'm very happy to share with you this afternoon these insights, no, from the field of migration and multiculturalism. These are the works that I consulted. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Belle. That was a very interesting and comprehensive review of trends and the debates on migration. You were able to explain international migration from various lenses at different societal levels. You were able also to demonstrate how migration is framed in different ways, such as using the agency structural lens, different subjectivities, gender and development, feminization of migration, migration and transnationalism, and multiculturalism, among others. You were able also to suggest various topics that are understudied in the field of migration. So I hope our students and even my colleagues from the university who are interested in migration are enlightened and were able to conceptualize the research papers in relation to the lecture. Okay, so I know that you have questions, the audience. You have some questions you want to ask from our speaker. So we are now open for your questions. So you can either type your questions on the chat box or may want to ask your question personally to the speaker by raising your hand. Okay. Any questions? Siguro ako na lang munang magtatanong. Since Belle, you studied in Japan from 2008 to 2011, and you did a study on the Japanois. So may we know what are the challenges of Filipinos in Japan, given that Japan, you said, is already a multicultural society. So given that fact, ano pa yung mga challenges or issues na na-experience ng mga Filipinos living in Japan?
Thank you, Peachy, for that important question. I think Up to now, our JFCs are still struggling in terms of language acquisition or the mastery of the Japanese language. That's why their mobility is really hampered by the limits of their Japanese language proficiency. Right now, more and more JFCs are incorporating very well by acquiring jobs in Japan, by intermarriage, by acquiring scholarship opportunities, but they continue to experience social and cultural discrimination. No? In fact, in my paper on RAP, on JFCs who use RAP as a way of adjusting in Japan, no? Or as a refuge to the discrimination that they experience in the hands of their own fathers, no? Stepfathers, or in general in their schools where bullying could happen, and in mainstream Japanese society, they look at themselves as an adopted son. No? Who is this biblical character who is considered to be the adopted son of Egypt? Anyone? In the Old Testament, nakaka-relate sila kasi usually they carry with them the Catholic faith. So they think in terms of Catholic metaphors, you know, Christian mga stories from the Bible. So even if they're in Japan, they continue to think that way, no? So they see themselves in the character of, sino nga ba yung biblical character na inampon?
Joseph.
Joseph. So they see themselves as Joseph, na para silang ampon sa Japan, na parang Egypt, no, para sa kanila. And they experience all this discrimination, but they see a future of empowerment later on, of being able to empower themselves. And they look at music or the practice of rap, doing rap concerts as a way of achieving empowerment in Japan. Kaya lang, as a researcher, sabi ko nga, for as long as you rap in Tagalog and English, hindi ka pa rin maintindihan ng mga Hapon. You really have to learn Japanese and rap in Japanese, because that's the way, for example, in studying Chicano and Black American rappers in the United States, they were able to get big contracts from big recording companies in the United States, and mainstream their craft by rapping in English. So for me, comparing their situation to bicultural immigrants in the United States, you have to really master the language of the country where you are if you want to get the opportunities offered by that society. Because I have met din naman parang Filipina singers who got, let's say, recording contracts from Sony Corporation. They really had to learn Japanese and sing in Japanese. Primarily jazz, kasi they were able to penetrate the Japan's music industry through jazz music.
Thank you for your answer. We have another question here from Professor Lim. She said, my students might be interested in brain circulation research. What can you suggest for undergraduate students should they want to do it?
I highly encourage Professor Lin that you pursue your plans to head a brain circulation research among your students, because I noticed nga wala po talagang gumagawa pa dito sa Philippines. So we have to encourage that, because Filipino migrants are really right now we still andun pa tayo sa brain drain na perspective. And in the West, they're already challenging that. In Japan, they're already challenging that. Pero kulang tayo ng empirical support to challenge that. But I know, just with observation, that brain circulation is practiced by our high-skilled Filipino migrants. Lalo na yung mga scientists natin who are doing balikbayan between the Philippines and America. Maraming ganun eh. Si Engineer Diosdado Manatao, for example, no? Yung mga scientists natin na Filipino sa Japan, they do have projects dito sa Philippines. So yes, ma'am, I encourage you po to to continue your carry out your plan. This would surely be a big help to the migration, to our field, to the field of migration in the Philippines.
So there's another question here, Belle, from Mr. Jed Batino. So what are the emerging debates or trends in studying migrant sending families? Because you've mentioned about studies on migrant workers, but what about migrant sending families?
Actually, Sir Jed, marami po tayong studies on on migrant sending families in the Philippines. Lalo na yung well-being, impact sa quality of life ng mga families. Pero ang kulang po na nakikita ko is to study their allocation patterns and how they make use and manage remittances, financial literacy. Lagi nating na-identify na may problema sa financial literacy ang mga OFW families natin. Pero in the first place, hindi natin tinitingnan na ang root cause nito ay ang allocation pattern, di ba? Lagi lang natin nakikita remittances, pero yung kanilang budgeting, allocation, use of remittances, ito po yung mahalagang dapat nating tingnan, and investment practices.
Okay, I think there's another question here. Let's go back to Japan. How social change affects the Japanese culture in terms of migration? This is from Angel Canadido from the BAS for Section 2 class.
Thank you, Angel. I suggest you read the book of Dr. Glacia Liu Farrer, Immigrant Japan, published 2020 ba or 2021? I think 2020, where she argues that Japanese people still believes in the myth that their society is still homogeneous. But if you open your eyes and if you look at statistics, through time, Japan has increasingly become a multicultural society, an immigrant society, because they have been recruiting caregivers, construction workers, nurses, and the presence of international students as well. And then many foreign wives, to Japanese men and even Japanese women who reside in Japan. So because of this, their laws are still, kasi ang immigration system ng Japan is based on the principle of jus sanguinis. We have two principles on immigration. We have jus sanguinis and jus soli. Jus soli is like the United States system where you can become a citizen based on residency, even if you don't have an American blood. You don't. What is being American anyway, di ba? An American citizenship is an achieved endeavor. You can stay there for 5 years, and then if you satisfy requirements, then you can become an American citizen. In using the principle of jus sanguinis, Japan insists on having Japanese blood. It is based on possessing the lineage talaga na may lahi ka talagang Hapon. So, ano ang future ng Filipino migrants sa Japan? You can win permanent residency in Japan. You can apply for that kapag 10 years ka na sa Japan. Excluding yung years na naging student ka. They only count from the first year that you were awarded the work visa. So, in Japan, permanent residency is different from being a citizen. However, it's the closest to parang to having to practicing citizenship in Japan so far, given that the principle of jus sanguinis is applied in the term in their immigration system. I hope that helps or answers your question, Angel.
There's another question here, and the student is asking about the pros and cons of migration in every country. That's a general question, actually. What's your take on that?
Thank you, Argeline, for that question. Ang pros and cons experienced yan macro, meso, and at the micro levels. Sa micro level, usually ang issue would be the social psychological cost of migration, that while they're earning economic remittances and there's greater purchasing power for OFW families, the cost is psychological naman, alienation, estrangement, and difficulties, no, emotional difficulties on the part of left behind family members, particularly the spouse and the children. At the community level, of course, with when you see nurses leaving the country, what about the needs of our very own healthcare system? No, ang hospitals natin nagkukulang sa mga doktor, sa mga nurses, sa mga teachers. And at the country level, of course, papasalamat tayo because we have huge dollar reserves from remittances. What kept the Philippines afloat in the 1997 Asian financial crisis, for example, relatively when we saw Thailand's baht weaken and the Malaysian ringgit depreciate, the Philippine peso was relatively one of the the Asian currencies that was able to float very well in 1997 because we have huge dollar reserves owing to the remittances from OFWs. May malaki kasi tayong diaspora, di ba? Unlike Malaysia and Thailand na konti lang yung mga migrants nila. So ayun, we are continually saved even during this pandemic by remittances from our OFWs. They are our economic saviors. So yun yung positive talaga na na effect ng migration sa sending country. Pero ang negative is that what about our own needs? Hingi ng nurses sa atin ang Germany, ang Japan, at mga malalaking bansa. Pero tayo ay kulang. Tayo mismo, healthcare system natin, nagkukulang tayo sa mga nurses. At hindi pa nga na-address yung mga unreleased benefits and salaries ng ating mga hazard pay ng ating mga healthcare workers. Kaya, especially during this pandemic. So, ayun. I hope nasagot ko ang inyong katanungan.
Belle, there's another question, but I think you already answered the question kasi ano daw yung pinaka-worst na pwedeng mangyari sa Pilipinas pag nagtuloy-tuloy yung generation of migration or migrant workers. I think meron pa bang maidadagdag aside from dun sa nabanggit mo about the scarcity of health workers?
So, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that question. Sabi nga ni late former President Noynoy Aquino, hindi siya nag-focus masyado sa migration kasi sabi niya eventually, if you create sustainability, if you strengthen the national economy, it will just naturally self-destruct. Yan naman ang goal nung kinreate yung migration policy ni President Marcos noong 1970s, di ba? They view it as a temporary or stopgap mechanism to unemployment in the country at that time. It will naturally self-destruct, according to former Labor Secretary Blas Ople. If our economy expands, we are able to create jobs here, and people would prefer to stay rather than leave, no? And to solve problems here. Ang problem is, of course, tulad lang ng nurses, pinag-uusapan natin, hindi sila nababayaran ng kanilang benefits, ng mga salaries nila. Kaya patuloy din silang tumitingin sa labas kung ano yung mga better opportunities para sa kanila and sa mga families nila. So hanggat natin na-address yun, magpapatuloy lang yung cycle of migration na 3 generations na ng mga families nagpapatuloy na nagmamigrate. So yung pinaka-worst na pwede mangyari, we have our very own healthcare system na weak, no? Because we are losing our manpower to countries who offer higher wages and benefits to them. And teachers as well. And of course, yung lack of sustainability sa ating mga, kumaga, at the household level, sa mga economic strategies ng Filipino families. Hindi naman talaga sustainable ang migration kasi tatanda ka rin, di ba? Tapos anong gagawin mo? Ipapalit mo lang yung anak mo? At tapos yung apo mo? Parang sustainable ba yon? Until when will it sustain your entire clan or family? Only at a particular time, until such time na nagkaroon kayo ng mga sustainable businesses, no, and investments in the Philippines, will that cycle stop?
Okay. Last question na siguro. We will go back again to Japan. So the question from Anthony Gagarin is, what prospects are there for immigration reform in Japan especially given the country's aging population and urgent need for more labor?
Actually, two-pronged yung question mo. Kasi sa aging population, hindi naman nagsasawa ang Japan sa policy nila na bigyan ng financial support ng government yung mga nagbubuntis na kababaihan, childcare, child delivery. Ang ganda nga sa Japan kasi we don't have that in the Philippines, no? Yung mga financial support nila sa welfare system nila. Pero yung mga babae, ayaw pa rin manganak, mag-asawa, no? They'd rather go shopping, they'd rather use their money to go to Europe. Kasi cultural psychological. They think having babies is mendoksay, no? Parang hassle lang. Sabi niya, magta-travel kami, how can we travel if we have a baby? So maraming babaeng ganun, no? They'd rather take care of dogs. Tapos, of course, relationship stress, alam naman natin yun. They just have a different culture, I think. That's why many women are opting for singlehood. There are more abortion, and abortion is legal in Japan. There are more abortion clinics than lying-in clinics. So that's the reason why their population is aging, and they have so much work. They're time poor. They work. The work-life balance in Japan is so bad. No, unlike countries like Australia, New Zealand. So most of their time is eaten up by their work routines, and it's even cultural again. Like to die because of overwork, there's a concept for that, karaos. It's justified because you did it for the collective, you did it for the company. So cultural, dapat tingnan yung kanilang mga cultural beliefs, no? If they are to give a solution to aging. Kasi kahit bigyan pa ng financial incentives ng gobyerno, kung culturally, halimbawa, walang work-life balance, may mga ganong beliefs na mendoksay nga ang pagkakaroon ng anak, then pagpapatuloy lang yung ganon, no? And then also they have to look at the way they look at migrants kasi marami sa kanila yung they're threatened by migrants, losing their jobs to migrants, and then granting them citizenship. They're very strict on citizenship. They're very strict. Like, di ba sa States, 5 years, sa kanila 10 years, di pa counted yung years na nag-aral ka. So, sobrang strict, no? So I'm sure they can look at their immigration policy. Tsaka you heard of that Sri Lankan woman who died in the immigration jail because she was overstaying. She overstayed, tapos wala na siyang permission to stay longer in Japan kasi nag-expire na yung visa niya. So she was incarcerated by the immigration authorities, and then she had some health issues, tapos hindi pinagbigyan yung request niya to be brought to a hospital. And it's not only one case, marami ng cases ng abuse sa mga immigration-related prisoners like that. So I'm sure with these abuses in Japan's immigration system, they really need to look at their system, which I feel is so strict. And these people, I don't think they intentionally overstayed. It's just that hindi na-explain sa kanila yung immigration laws. Kasi it's written in kanji. Tapos siguro walang nagka-counsel sa kanila, walang hotline na pwedeng tawagan para ipaliwanag kung anong gagawin mo kung mag-expire na yung visa mo, paano yung transition, and you can hardly communicate kasi the authorities are speaking in Nihongo. Diba? Konti lang yung nagpo-provide ng English translation. So there's so much to reform in. Although I am not in the position to say that. As a foreigner there, I know from stories na they need to bring the support to the grassroots level para maiwasan na yung mga foreigners na nangangapa sa society nila kung paano ba mag-a-apply ng visa, maghahanap ng trabaho, paano ba humingi ng tulong pag may health emergency, mga ganun.
Okay, thank you so much. And now we will move to the awarding of the certificate of appreciation to our lecturer. So the certificate of appreciation is awarded to Ms. Yellow Belduwaki for sharing her knowledge and expertise on the International Lecture Series on the Contemporary World with the webinar entitled Migration and Multiculturalism held on October 19, 2020. Signed by the Chair of the Department of Social Sciences, Dr. Melanie P. Tolentino. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and please stay para sa ating photo documentation. Okay, Sir Jed, ikaw na ang bahala.
So,
Please,
slide number 1. Turn on po pala yung video. Sige po. Sa slide number 1 po, taking picture. 1, 2, 3. Slide number 2 po. 1, 2, 3. Number 3 po. 1, 2, 3. And then number 4 po. 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much po.
Thank you so much.
thank you, Belle.
Thank you so much po.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope to work with you in the future. Some collaboration sa research or activities like this. Okay? Thank you so much, everyone.
Congratulations for organizing a successful event. And nice to meet you all.